cheering for him. They're going to go nuts when he hits this thing.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Yo, yo, yo. Welcome in, golf fans. You hear those three words, you know you've made it to Preferred Lines on a Monday night. My name is Joe Idoni. At Tour Picks is the place to find me on X. And welcome to the Preferred Lines Golf Podcast and live stream. This week, here to cover the Olympic Games, specifically the men's competition over in the Paris Olympics. We're going to sort of spend a few minutes recapping the 3M Open. Big week. Finally got that huge winner I've been looking for all season in Jhonattan Vegas. Thank you, Johnny. We'll talk a little Live UK. We'll talk overarching stories about the Olympics and the state of professional golf right now. Get into some picks. Get into a little bit of course preview. Got a fantastic guest, part of the Rotoballer team, to do it all with me. And I have to mention this show is proudly sponsored and presented by the team over at Rotoballer PGA. The best group of content creators in golf. I am biased, but ask anybody who has signed up for one of those memberships, and they will happily agree it is the most bang for your buck you will possibly get. And you can get even more of it by using the promo code LINES, LINES, in a nod to this podcast. That'll let the good people over there know that I sent you. I've been posting matchup picks that have been crushing. The card obviously did well last week. You get access to every piece of content that I do each and every week, as well as the other fantastic group of people who are totally dedicated to covering professional golf. There to help you play DFS, there to help you make your bets, there to help you win a little bit of money while doing so and having fun. One of those people joins me right now, a former fantasy golf writer of the year. This guy absolutely crushes it in every phase. Anytime he puts his mind into a golf tournament, it usually comes out right. At Tee Off Sports on Twitter. Welcome back to Preferred Line, Spencer Aguiar. It's great to talk to you. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, Joe. You know, you want to talk about the best, and I do think that we have a great team over at Rotoballer, but you have the best intro in the game. There's nobody's show that has quite the intro that you do. So, you know, I'm just going to throw this out there. It's obviously your show. You can make the decision on it. But if we end up hitting a winner here this week, I would like to be one of the clips in 2025 entering the show. So,
right,
we can work into that. We can figure out the logistics of it, but very excited to be back.
Consider it done. I love to dabble in a little bit of video editing. You know, I get into the weeds of graphics and stuff like that. So we'll be happy to put you on as one of the expert guest portion in next year's show. Thank you for those kind words. How did you do? How was your let's talk 3M Open first. Lucky enough to hit Johnny. It was a sweatful Sunday for me, but I had a lot of the top of the board. What were your thoughts on that tournament and how things sort of ended up?
Vegas was a great bet. I'll let you talk about that a little bit more. He was the first name that missed my card. And, you know, it's one of those unfortunate things that sometimes comes into play. Same answer with Xander at the Open, Bobby Mack at the Scottish. It's what makes these wins so much sweeter when they happen, because at Rotoballer, we're trying to figure out a way to have long-term success, and it's going to come with ebbs and flows. And at a lot of places, you only hear about the highs that end up coming into play with it. There's ups and downs. It's gambling at the end of the day. There's human element that comes into the mix. Jhonattan Vegas was a great bet. I'll let you talk about him a little bit more, but inside of the top 7 of my model, some of the projected win equity, and this is kind of what you get for a player who hasn't won in 7 years, went in the negative trajectory route. And that's why I ended up moving in the other direction on it and not betting him. Had a lot of DFS exposure, but great win for Vegas. His ball striking has been elite now for a couple of months. So it was good to see him get back into the winner's circle.
Yeah, and you know what, for me, you're right about it. Nobody really wants to talk about the lows. 2024 has basically been one of the toughest outright betting seasons that I've ever had in terms of golf. We had Knapp early on. I had Bobby McIntyre a few weeks, but they've sort of been few and far between. So it was nice. And what I come back to is there was a stretch there where I had 4 consecutive weeks where I had the runner-up. That can be demoralizing And it was to a degree, but you have to understand that you're connecting the majority of the dots. And at the end of the day, it's golf. It comes down to one or two shots. It comes down to one or two decisions. It comes down to a chip in. It comes down to little things. And you have to sort of trust the process. And that's kind of what I got back to a little bit this week. Johnny Vegas and Mav McNeely, not normally two guys that when a betting board drops on Monday that my eyes are immediately drawn to in terms of outright betting. But man, they were 2 and 3 in the stat model that I ran. The numbers were showcasing them, and I put a lot of that on recent form, especially with Johnny Vegas. Some of the tee to green rounds he put together in his last 4 tournaments were fantastic. You sprinkle in a little bit of course history, and you end up on the right name. There was a lot that went on there. Interesting finish. I was quite impressed with the fact that he was able to stand on the 18th tee for what felt like 20 minutes before playing a cut with that lake on your right, stretching the whole hole was ballsy. Hit a bad approach shot, and to be able to two-putt that with seemingly very little nerves, or at least impact of the nerves, was impressive. Then you have, did you catch any of Grazerman in the clubhouse, playing long before? What were your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's an interesting take. I mean, I do like that once I think he figured out that there's a possibility that he might be out there, that he got back onto the range to see what could happen. But I like what you said, Joe. I was in a very similar boat, and I still find myself in a very similar boat. 5 second place finishes in 7 events. And the good thing about that answer, at least if you're trying to find a positive, one, it means you're reading the board well.
Yeah.
2, there's other avenues of the market that we can try to make some of those wagers on. There's head-to-heads, there's placements. If you're lucky enough to have each way betting, you can always dabble into that. So, the outright ticket, as you know, Joe, is going to be the one that makes the headline. It's Jhonattan Vegas. I don't know what price you got on him, but Jhonattan Vegas, insert the number. That's going to be the clickbait of everybody's going to want to see that. But as you said, you've been crushing the matchups. My matchups have been solid this year, over 57%. That's my bread and butter. That's where I'm going to make a profit at the end of the day. And if the outrights can come in at a higher rate, that's how I end up in these 50, 60 unit sort of years. So, hopefully we can close the year strong. Still about 12 units of profit on the season, which is the lowest I've been since I've entered the space. But that's the thing at the end of the day. It's this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. You're going to have the highs. You're going to have the lows. It's about sticking to the game plan, figuring out a strategy that works for you, and putting the pieces together every single week to figure out how you can best extrapolate that into a one tournament setting of how can we turn a profit and increase our ROI.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you had a lot of good points there, not only that I think should be paid attention to by anyone who's betting golf, but can also be sort of extrapolated to life there as well. The highs and the lows and the short-term gains and losses, you have to be willing to withstand and understand that someone like yourself, who's having the worst year of his documented career betting sports, is still up 12 units, is incredibly impressive in a space where 95% of people lose money, right? So the historical data doesn't lie. I think what you said there about, I think focusing on very long-term goals in betting golf are important. So I hit Bobby Mack, right? 45-1. I got in on Xander after Thursday at the Open Championship at 7.5-1. I hit Johnny Vegas at 90-1. I don't want to pull out a penny, Spencer. And I realized that strategy, it's like, well, what's the fun in that? What it's about for me is the fact that I wasn't really sweating so much the losses that had taken place the month before, and understanding that I have a goal for the end of the golf season and I want to see my way to that. If you hit one winner and you're taking out that money each and every week, I think that it makes winning consistently tough. It makes you tend to change strategy and be unrealistic and put the expectations at a place where they don't really belong on a week-to-week basis. So I think little things like that can help you be a better bettor. I think little things like that, if you understand it in the proper context, can help you be a better person.
Yeah, I've told this story before on a show, but one of my really good family friends was the late great Chip Reese, who's was a professional poker player, arguably the greatest cash game player that's ever lived before. And he said it best: when he goes and he plays poker, everything is ammunition to him. He's buying in for $1 million, but it's not that it's $1 million; it's ammunition that he's using for that day. And there's a real life bankroll, there's a betting bankroll. Those two things do not merge for me. Those two things stay separate. The only time that money ends up getting removed is when I end up dispersing it within accounts in a different capacity. So it can be a little bit flatter with it. But, this is something, and I keep going back to the term ROI and trying to build a bankroll. Like, that's all this is. It's about finding value at the end of the day. It's about increasing a bankroll. And by doing that, you can't be scared money. And you always have to be within your bankroll management. I think that's one of the biggest concerns that people run into. It's either they end up betting more money than they're capable of betting, and then they find themselves in these spots where they're desperately trying to hedge. The other problem that comes into play there is you see that money go away quickly and you don't have the capacity to get back to it because you've lost all your money. This is a slow build. It's a slow grind at the end of the day. It's why I said 5 minutes ago, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. This is not some get rich quick scheme. And a lot of times people that are new that entered the space see the success that, we can even just use us, that you and I have had.
Mm-hmm.
There's ups and downs to this. This is not going to be every single week that there's profit. And as I said at the beginning, it's what makes the highs so great when you do hit them, because it's not that every single week you're putting in $1,000 and you're getting back 2,000. Like there is real strategy and a real build that's coming into place here. And, at the end of the day, that strategy, I love strategy-based games. I love the ability to try to maneuver and traverse my way through. And that's what sports betting, just like poker for me, did. So, I just think that's important for people to keep in mind. It's not going to be profit every single week.
Well said. Shifting gears sort of over to Live UK, John Rahm finally gets his first Live win. I didn't see much of it. I had two outright picks there. Neither of them were really in it. So I was kind of tuned out, knowing that I was very much going to be glued into the 3M in the afternoon. There were moments earlier in the week where he went viral from getting upset by the conditions. I think it's a different type of atmosphere there that hasn't exactly got along well with John Rahm. He's blown a couple of leads. He seems to be placing blame on exterior circumstances quite a bit, but ultimately the best player on their tour finally got his victory that he's been looking for. A little bit of a monkey off the back. Maybe if you were wise enough to kind of see this coming with finally having a good performance at Troon, good on you. Thoughts on sort of John Rahm closing out his own teammate to then they won the team championship, but it came down to him and Hatton, who was right there once again.
Game's turning around, as you said. When you look at what he did at Royal Troon, he was on the wrong end of the draw there with the weather. Still produced a top 10 finish. I think that we're starting to see this, and we can get into this when we talk about the outright board with John Rahm, because I do have takes here. We talked about this before we even went live. It is an extremely watered down field at the bottom. For me, I'm going to say 20% of the very bottom of this is as bad as you're going to get on any given week. So you essentially have 45, 48 players, give or take, that have some credibility, and that's probably even giving it a little bit too much at the end of the day. Like that's including the bottom end guides that I don't necessarily believe have win equity, but they have top 10 sort of equity. They may be players that I'm looking to play in DFS, placement market sort of bets, things of that nature. But we got a really interesting outright board because of that. Because if you look at the top, and I'll save the conversation, Joe, I'm not trying to push us all the way into this, but I just think the John Rahm conversation is what makes this unique. You get the very top of the board here where Xander and Scotty dominant in 2024. Xander has 2 majors. Scotty's won pretty much everything else throughout the entire year. You get them at these prices that are going to be 4 or 5 to 1, give or take, depending on exactly where you're able to find them. Really challenging numbers to get to when you try to lay out a betting card. It doesn't mean that there's not an ability to get to them. There are ways to alter your card, I would say, and we can discuss that in a second, but it's from there what happens to the board that was what interested me most, because at his very best, John Rahm is in that same tier as those other two. we can say that the 4 and 5 to 1 numbers are too low. You can say they're too high. I don't even really care which way that you're arguing it right now. If you think it's one way, then obviously Rom becomes value on the flip side of it. But there were a couple pockets, Rom being one, Victor Hovland, which I'll talk about in a second, being the other one, where you got these drifts to where if I ran the high-end numbers from Rom that I had from a year ago before this move to live, he is every bit on the playing field as what we're seeing with Xander and Scotty. You get him at double the price, even a little bit more than that. So, and that's kind of a spoiler alert of where I went at the top of the board with John Rahm, but I do think that the game's trending back in the right direction, and I'll give some of the statistical reasons behind that in a second.
Yeah, I'm going to pull up the board here in just a second, Spencer, and we'll get into those top names. But where do you sort of classify and categorize the accomplishment of a gold medal in golf right now? We've had obviously 2018 Justin Rose won in Rio, not 2018, excuse me, but Justin Rose won in Rio, Xander in Tokyo. There were actually in the early 1900s, golf was played twice in the Olympics. So this will be the fourth or the fifth time, it's going to be a recognized sport. The accomplishment, Rose was number 12 in the world. Xander was top 5 in the world. These are top players who are winning this thing. Like we talked about, they are playing for virtually no money, right? Which is unusual in the world of players from LIV, players from the PGA Tour. This is an elevated event. You aren't getting $4 million if you win. If Scotty Scheffler wins this week, he gets $37,500. And if you finish fourth or miss out on that playoff like Rory McIlroy did in the last Olympic Games, you're going home with $0. And they just basically cover your living expenses for the week. A different sort of vibe. Even in the Ryder Cup, you're still getting paid. How much are the players, do you believe, coming around on what this means to their legacy and their career if they're able to medal in the Olympics?
I think that's the reason why they're there. You said it best, $37,500 for a gold medal. Trickle that down a little bit for a silver and bronze. I don't have the numbers up in front of me. Every country pays different. Yeah. That's what the United States is paying in that particular situation.
Right.
We joked off air. Like, that's the worst cash of Scotty Scheffler's year, if that's what he ends up producing with it. It does produce this very unique outlook that comes into play, though, kind of for all the reasons that you just said. Like, just take a normal tournament. Mm-hmm. Whether there's a cut or not a cut, we can make both examples work here. You play the opening 2 rounds to make the weekend. If there's a cut, if there's not a cut, you play the opening 2 rounds to put yourself in position. You kind of get more or less aggressive from there, whether you're trying to win, are you trying to get a better payday? All of that comes into play. You specifically look here at the Olympics now. You said it best, Joe. First, second, third. If you're not first, second, or third, you get nothing at the end of the day. You're playing for a medal. This is a volatile course. There is a lot of water that's going to come into play. Mm-hmm. I know everybody's going to talk about the club down nature here. It's been played at different times of the year over the last 5 years, a little bit later, the last couple years. If you look more further back from that, you're going to get this more around the time that we have it now. But it's a plotter setup at the end of the day for me. You're going to have long iron play, but that's a very differing answer that comes into play because I'm talking about conservative nature, plotters, the ability to scramble out and salvage a score. But then on the flip side of it, I'm talking about aggression because you have to work yourself up the leaderboard. What happens to the player if they blow up on day one and their only way back is to be hyper aggressive? I don't know how that's going to work here. We don't have enough of a long-term blueprint to pull from. There's no examples of what happens at this particular course in that situation. So it probably makes it more challenging on that front, trying to figure out exactly how we want to build a card. But for me, I guess the core came down to find fairways, iron proximity. Can you create birdie looks? Do you have the ability to make putts from 5 to 15 feet? I had a regression in my model for strokes gain around the green, which is where it pushed me into a lot of different areas that I landed on. Okay. I'm hoping that my players can be sufficient for the first 2 days. Let's go from there, and then let's win a golf tournament from there. If you work yourself too far back, you're going to put yourself into a really bad spot.
Yeah, a little bit more about the golf course that I have. So the Albatross course at Le Golf National, just outside of Paris, built in 1990. So a relatively new course design and architecture by, of course, European golf standards. 2015 underwent a pretty substantial renovation in an effort to amplify, I think, the difficulty and prepare the grounds to host the 2018 Ryder Cup. It has hosted several of the Open de France tournaments, the French Open, essentially, which is on the DP World Tour since then. It has sort of aspects, and what they did is they really wanted this course to be suitable to host big time events, which is obviously what it's done. It's been around for 35 years, and you've had a Ryder Cup and an Olympics Games, as well as a National Open. That speaks a lot to the volumes of the course design being proper, and also the venue's ability to host these type of events. They wanted to bring sort of a stadium style aspect like we see at a lot of these TPC courses. People are able to see golf shots from all over the venue. There's a lot of water runs through 10 holes on the course. So over the half the holes feature a good bit of water. The men are going to play this as a par 71 at 7,174 yards. The women play it at 6,300. It's a par 72, just in case you're sort of looking into that. But the main thing that sort of comes to mind for me is I'm thinking a lot like you are. It's position. This course is all about position. You can attack Le Golf National. You can do so, but you have to do so from the proper spot, which is the fairway. So you want to say plotter, you want to say club down, whatever it is. I don't think that that's necessary for all players, because if you hit it straight, I think that you can still deploy driver. Like, I think players like Shane Lowry or Tom Kim or Colin Morikawa or Ludwig Oberg to a degree, players who are very confident that they're going to be able to hit 65% of fairways can still do that. And then it becomes about position where you can get aggressive. There are some low scores, but make no mistake, this is a challenging golf course. The area has had a ton of rain. If you've watched any of the Olympics or you watched any of the opening ceremonies, the place is soaking wet. I think the course probably slows down a bit. Greens are POA and bent. They are actually deploying that graduated rough that they brought into play during the Ryder Cup that I noticed. Now, I don't think it's to that degree. The Ryder Cup went from like 2-inch rough to like 5 yards, 4.5-inch rough, which really put a demand that is debatable, but was arguably done so with the intention to benefit their team. This still has 3 graduations of rough, I think 2.2, 3.5, and then the really heavy stuff is 4.7-inch. You cannot miss big. You cannot be attacking and trying to chase a leaderboard and trying to chase down guys because you're desperate for a bronze medal if you're doing so from the second or third cut of rough. Those are some of the notes I have. I'm very similar. I think it sounds like aligning on some of the player attributes that I think are going to be best suited to take down this golf course. We have some history here, but it's set up by different people. It's at a different time of year. I think it's ultimately going to come down to who's in form and who possesses the particular traits of strength that I'm looking for to attack this golf course in the best way.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. It's one of those venues, as you said, like, you just have to know when you can attack and when you cannot attack, and that's what's going to make it most challenging at the end of the day with it, just because there's going to think of on the final round, there's going to be players that are going to have to push a little bit harder. Unfortunately, it's just the
Yeah.
nature of the game. It makes a much more volatile tournament if you're talking about in-tournament bets. Haven't necessarily figured out the blueprint for how I want to attack some of that, because I do think at the end of the day, everybody's going to come out with the game plan on round one, and they're going to try to stick to it. Based off of how that goes, you're going to have to deviate a little bit from that answer.
Yes.
But that deviation can really cause some massive divergences compared to what the expectation would be for those players.
Absolutely. And you made a great point. I think, you're talking names like Scotty, Xander, Rory. I don't know that it messes with them too much. This idea that the entire week is essentially top 3 or bust, right? I think they attack tournaments with that mindset for the most part anyways. Like, they aren't being conservative because they don't want to blow a 21st place finish. But I think for a lot of the other players, it's different. It's also different than playing in a Ryder Cup, right? Like you mentioned, the going for top 3 and being aggressive in spots is much different than the strategy that you play in a Ryder Cup when it's match play, and you can be very conservative in spots, aggressive in others, but ultimately you're playing against the other person. Here you're playing the golf course and you have to beat 57 other guys in order to make the week worthwhile. So different setup. Let's bring up the board here. Favorite this week, surprise, surprise, Scotty Scheffler is back on a golf course that should suit him incredibly well, and he's 4-1. Xander is 6-1. Rory McIlroy right behind that at plus 850. John Rahm 11-1. Colin Morikawa 12-1. Oberg 12-1. Those are the 6 name at the top. I have a feeling you let it out of the bag earlier who you're liking, but go ahead and confirm it for me, Spence.
Yeah, so when I ran the top of the board, there were 2 names that separated themselves, Scotty and Xander. That's an every week occurrence that comes into play.
Sure.
The third name that found himself moving up further, I ran this 3 weeks ago when I did an Action Network show, and Rahm was a little bit further back. As I've updated some of the numbers that we've gotten, I don't include much live data in it. I try to throw in the bits and pieces that I can. It does have the Open Championship result that I threw in my model. If we look at Jon Rahm's profile, at his very best, he was one of the best weighted total drivers in the world. He was long and he was straight. When I run my long-term numbers, and this is coming from a model, and I've said this a million times on shows, I run things from a longer duration of time than most people end up doing. Jon Rahm, 37th out of 60 players in weighted total driving. If I backtrack that total there in more of the prototypical Rahm fashion, or I actually just subtract it and just run like the last 8 rounds that I have for him, all of a sudden now he jumps into the top 5 for me, which pushes him right in that same territory that we have for Scotty and Xander. I thought 11-1. I talked about this at the beginning. There's pockets here of value to where, look, if Scotty or Xander wins, it's not going to be a shock. I like Jon Rahm more than I like Rory. The margins are thin, but when we're dealing in the betting world, you have to take your thin margins and go across in that direction. I bet Jon Rahm at 11. I thought he was the best value at the top. He's inside the top 5 for me in 3 or 4 of the main categories that I ran this week. That includes weighted scoring. That includes projected proximity that he has for this course. I think Rahm has finally put the pieces together. And, I don't want to use this argument too much because this is a glorified version to me of what team golf is. Like, this is country golf, but
Yeah.
Jon Rahm gets up for these moments. Like, there's a handful of players that exceed expectations when these things come into play. There's a handful of players that go in the opposite direction. Rahm, for me, when he's playing for country or he's playing for team, is a very passionate golfer. It can work on the negative end of it that he puts too much energy and too much emotion into it. But I thought 11-1 was the best value at the top of the board.
Makes a ton of sense. I'm not going to get behind Scotty at 4-1. You could make a case there and put dollars there, and it may turn out to be profitable. But I think long term, like we talked about earlier, looking at the like season-ending results, being able to weather the ups and downs is going to be much more difficult to do and is less sustainable. Taking a guy 4-1, even at the talent level of Scotty Scheffler. Xander coming in at 6-1. Defending gold medal champion, whatever you want to call it. I think he gets up for this event. I worry, and I think rightfully so. Probably hadn't touched a club since the Open. Got a little practice round. I'm sure he shook all that rust off, but I'm just not willing to get there at 6-1. I have zero interest in Rory. I don't think I know he's posted some good results here. I don't think he is in any sort of headspace to compete right now. He's bounced all over the place on everything, it seems like, in the world of golf, including the Olympics. Ahead of the last time the Open was at Royal Troon, he completely bashed the Olympics in Rio and said he didn't care whatsoever. He may never play. Last year, he had is he going to play for Britain? Is he going to play for Ireland? Didn't show up on the Ireland team boat there with Shane Lowry the other night, chirping at fans at St. Andrews. I don't know where this guy's head is at right now, so I'm not willing to back him. For me, it comes down to Rahm or Morikawa. Here's what my gut betting instinct tells me. Take Rahm. He's heating up. His talent level is top 3 in the world. That's good value at triple the price of Scheffler. But if I kind of align with the strategy that I used and deployed last week, and to just trust some of the numbers and trust the data a little bit, Colin Morikawa is playing unbelievably right now. And he's not only got the best part of his game back, which is the approach play, which has been peaking incredibly. He's doing it tee to green. He's gaining a ton of strokes off the tee recently. Over the last 24 rounds, which is his last 6 tournaments, he's hitting 76.2% of fairways in regulation. Tour average, for reference, is 60. He's hitting 3 more fairways around than anyone else. He's doing it on approach. He's playing with a hot putter right now, which is random for him. 4 strokes gained putting in his last 4 events. It just seems like everything is sort of unfolding, and it's a great course fit for Morikawa. So ultimately, Card will be out Wednesday. But right now, I'm stuck trying to make a decision between Morikawa and Rahm at the top. Coming from like sort of a fantasy angle, I think Morikawa, I wonder your thoughts on his popularity this week. I think he's at the bottom of the 10K range there at 10.2. You know, he's $2,300 less than Scheffler. He's priced, $500 below Rahm. He's priced below Oberg this week. I wonder how popular he gets, but I think that his floor performance is pretty high in a DFS format this week for me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that. You talked about all the recent metrics of how they're trending for Morikawa. My decision came down at the Open Championship to either Xander or Morikawa. I've talked about that. I haven't hit a winner in a couple weeks, so you can guess which one I went in the direction of. But Morikawa's game from top to bottom in all 4 strokes gain metrics has been trending in the right direction. Number 1 expected total driver for me at this course, and that is number 1 in almost every single category that I looked at. Like, I ran it 4 different ways, and I put all the totals into it. That's going to take, when water comes into play, it's going to take penalizing misses in general. It's just going to look at accuracy. It's going to look at difficult scoring courses and how some of those, he was number 1 across the board in those areas.
Yeah.
I don't think you can make, this is obviously for betting, it's a different answer, and you can't bet everybody. And in reality, you can probably only bet one of these names if you're actually trying to build a correct card here. For DFS, you can make a little bit of a different discussion, but to me, at the $10,000 section and above on DraftKings, like, that's going to be 6 of the 7 projected favorites in this field. Like, pricing is correct at the top. I understand your sentiment around Rory. I would agree. He is lower on my card than most of those names that we're talking about. But even with him, like, I wouldn't be shocked if he came out and put the pieces together. But where I am going to say that I am in alignment with you is I'm probably not going to play him at the end of the day. Like, to me, the contrarian route is probably going to be Jon Rahm. We'll see if that ends up holding true. Maybe the live victory pushes a lot of people on him, and that's a discussion to be had in 24 hours as these numbers come in. In an ideal world, Morikawa gets pushed back because of his poor performance, at least quote unquote, by the standards that everybody wanted for him at the Open Championship. But the DFS answers for me usually 90% of the time at the very top. If there's very thin margins that we're working between, leverage. Where can I find the leverage? So without those numbers built in, I don't necessarily feel comfortable saying one way or another with it. But as I said, this is a pretty strong group at the top there.
Yeah, just interested kind of in your thoughts, because I trust you as one of the sharpest minds in terms of DFS. I have your rankings wizard pulled up now. When you mentioned that word leverage, where does the pendulum sort of swing in terms of price versus ownership? Like, let's look at those 2 names we talked about, Rahm and Morikawa. So you get a little technically some leverage on Morikawa by saving $500 there. How off would the ownership have to be to make it seem like the leverage position was back on Jon Rahm?
I always run leverage within my model based off of what my ranking is for the player and specific game contests that I'm going to be playing. So, if you want to talk cash game, leverage doesn't matter. You can just play your 6 best players and move forward there. Single entry possesses a very similar mentality. I think a lot of times, and as the industry has gotten sharper here with these discussions, the word leverage has probably been overblown in the industry quite a bit because everybody's trying to find the golfer that nobody's going to be on. And at the end of the day, if you're trying to play a player that nobody's on, you need to naturally be substantially higher than the market on that person. So Rahm at the Open Championship is a very prime example of that within my model. There was a minute difference between Rahm and everybody else within my sheet. Like I had him much closer to the range that he was in than the general public did. The general public, though, played him at less than 10%. And it pushed me in this direction that I have a top 10 player in my model. There's technically negative. I'm trying to figure out the right word to simplify this. Like a negative value. We'll just use value to simplify this. There's a negative value for his price tag in my sheet, but there's a massive leverage opportunity based off of him being a top 10 player in my sheet and him landing outside of the top X% of people that are picking him. So it's always where they are in my sheet in comparison to the contests I'm playing, mixing that into how much more aggressive or less aggressive I should get in those spots.
Well said, man. Thank you for clearing that up. All right, moving to the next sort of section here on the board. This is where you start to, I think a lot of people will gravitate toward as wanting a bigger price in outright golf betting. You know, most of us want to build a card with 4 or 5 guys this week. If you want to do that, you've probably got to stick to this range in terms of starting off. But you have Fleetwood at 22-1, former champion and has won the French Open before. There are 3 players in the field who have won the Open de France, by the way: Tommy Fleetwood, Alex Noren, and Guido Migliozzi. Shane Lowry is 24-1, coming off an ebbs and flows, ups and down week at Royal Troon, where he sort of ran away with it. Then things got going the wrong direction, and he finished strong. Neiman, it's interesting to see Neiman here. So a couple of the live guys were able to make their way in. 25-1 on Neiman. Victor Hovland, 28-1 is the number. Tom Kim, 30-1. Norn is there at 35-1. Corey Connors, 35. Hideki, 35. Those are the prices here on the odds checker grid below 50-1 in that next range. Where are you leaning, Spencer? Is there anyone that you really like or anyone that you really don't like in that range of the board?
I talked about there being pockets in this tournament of value. And I thought Hovland was one of those areas where the market may have pushed too far in the other direction there. I had a 35-1 that I found today that I was able to punch a ticket on. You want to talk about Hovland's form and his lack of ability to string results together. I certainly understand that concern. There's a reason why he has drifted up now into this 30, 35, 28-1 number that you just talked about, Joe. I think the difference is, look at the PGA Championship. I also had him at the PGA Championship, but he drifted up to 50-1 that week. There are certain venues that are much more accentuated for his skill set than others. And one of those keys for me that usually comes into play is when you can put him at one of these courses where around the green play gets mitigated to some sense. So he's 6th in my model when faced with similar total driving courses, 2nd for weighted strokes gained total. Those are 2 high-end marks for a golfer that's moving in the wrong direction. And then 4th on similar putting surfaces. I just said this, like, struggles for him have occurred with the sloppy around the green production that we've seen in 2024. But I thought that you add the amount of thick rough that comes into play, the water that's around these greens, all of that highlights his ball striking. And at its very core, shrinks his inability to scramble from around the surface. That doesn't mean he's not going to blow up. It doesn't mean that he's not going to be the Victor Hovland that we have seen for the last couple months. But what it does suggest is every single time this year, at least according to my model, that we've gotten him at a course that mitigates some of those concerns, we've gotten more of the prototypical Victor Hovland that comes into play. So I thought Hovland in that 30, 35, 28-1 range even, I would have played this down to 22-1. I think all of those numbers end up being value there. So Hovland would probably be my favorite from that mix. I'm going to be out on Min Woo. I'm going to be out on Hideki. I know nobody's going to want to hear this necessarily. I'm going to be out on Tom Kim. Maybe more of an answer that comes into play for DraftKings than anything else, just because I think he's going to be extremely popular at the end of the day. But probably those 3 would be the 3 that I'm just not really looking to have exposure to.
Yeah, totally makes sense there on Tom Kim from a DFS perspective. I do agree with you. He's going to be extremely popular there in that low 9K range. I don't think many people are going to want to gear toward Noren, at essentially the same price. Neiman's form has been a little bit questionable, and he got those wins early in the year. Fleetwood people will always play, but I think Kim gets popular. I did make him a bet this week. 33-1 is the number that I got on him. I do I and I threw this out there earlier to my guy Drew, who I respect a lot on course previews, but I saw some similarities here a little bit in TPC River Highlands, just in terms of course length, course setup, those kind of things. He was obviously in the mix there of a place that is very positional type of golf course that isn't going to overly reward power that you can just come out and overpower. I think this course shares some similarities there. One of the more accurate drivers of the golf ball in the entire field, came to the French Open last year and I believe was 10 under just after day one. So he had played a couple holes on day two, was 10 under, was in a huge lead here. Ended up coming back a little bit, finished sixth that week last year in the 2023 Open de France, but still a good posted result. And he did so dealing with an injury. So he was still sort of rehabbing from that injury that he suffered during the Open. Listening to him talk about why he chose to play that event last year, even while dealing with injury, when a lot of people thought that he should just rest, speaks a lot to why I like him this week. I think that he's hyper motivated to compete. He talked about the reason he was there is because the Olympics is on his mind. He said this a year ago. Tom Kim said this. And one of the reasons for that is the Olympics carries a lot more weight and you could say pressure, but it carries a level of importance for those Korean players that it doesn't for many other players. It's a way for them to get out of that mandatory military service. If you post any medal, gold, silver, or bronze, he's out. That's still clearly something that has to be always in the back of your mind. And I think it adds a little bit of motivation for Tom. And he's the type of player that I think pressure works very positively for. There are some players historically where you pile on that sort of pressure and they underperform. I think that he rises to the occasion more times than not. You saw in the President's Cup, he is the youngest player in the field this week of the 60 guys still. A lot to play for. I think there's promising stuff with the form if you're willing to ignore what happened at the Open. And after he played like 9 straight weeks, I think he missed the cut at the Rocket. But he was playing very well before that. Clearly has the driver figured out and can get a hot putter, plays good on short golf courses. Tom Kim's definitely one for me at 30-1, and I'm considering potentially adding another in this range.
I mean, I think you bring up good points with Tom Kim. More of my concern with him probably comes down to the DraftKings ownership that you're going to have. The one problem that I had with Kim, and maybe this is just me being too nitpicky in situations at the end of the day, he was 50-1 like 3 weeks ago for the Olympics. And, you string together a good result and all of a sudden he drops down to this 30-1 range.
Yeah.
It's very difficult from these players that we've talked about so far because pricing is more or less accurate in a lot of these spots. I don't have any massive differences. Like the biggest difference for me in my model of any of the names we've talked about so far would technically be Hideki. And that's a price for Hideki in the outright market where my number thought he should have been higher than that. For DFS purposes, my guess would be he lands somewhere in the middle. Probably not going to play him based off of that. I don't think he's going to be super popular. Don't think he's going to be a name that is completely faded. My guess would be the player that is, and this is why the Victor Hovland answer makes sense in a lot of ways. I would think Victor Hovland is probably of like those 9,000 and up golfers. My guess would be he's going to be the lowest owned.
Yeah.
High ceiling, put him in the right contest. I don't want to play him in cash games. I don't want to play him in anything like that. But if I'm trying to shoot for the moon for a golfer that, if you could give me Victor Hovland at sub 10% versus some of these other names that might be like 25%, we'll see where these numbers end up going. But that is the most intriguing option for me in Hovland. But I don't disagree with what you said about Kim. Like there's a certain built-in profile. I don't know if it's a positive or a negative with the medal at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's something that, every person is built differently, but if Kim is wired in that direction to where he has the potential to put it together, it's like one of those boom or bust options that can win a
Totally.
golf tournament with it.
Yep. Beyond 50-1, Straka, Benny On, Jason Day at 60-1, Wyndham Clark, the fourth member of Team USA. Team USA, the most players of any sort of country in the field. 32 different countries have a guy in the field this week. USA has 4. The first 3 are in the top 4 guys of the odds board: Morikawa, Scheffler, Schauffele. Then you have Wyndham Clark down here at 66-1, obviously not in good form. Then you get Tommy Dietrich at 70-1, Bezadenhout 75. We get our native Frenchman in Mathieu Pavone at 80-1, Moronk 90, Ortiz 90. Nikolai Hojgaard, and you have Guido there at 100-1, who I mentioned won the Open de France, I believe 2022, maybe that was. Any names sort of in this long shot range, and you can even go beyond it, Spencer, that you have some interest in potentially backing in an outright market or placement market this week?
I wanted to try to figure out a way to get exposure to Sepp Straka. I didn't get there in the outright market. Maybe that's more of a placement sort of an outlook. Maybe we can talk about in tournament betting with it. I don't, the next name that ends up entering my card is Victor Perez at 110-1. I like Perez this week a lot. He was inside the top 15 projected upside caliber players in my sheet. And I also like him for head-to-head bets, which is usually, if upside comes into play, I normally don't want to play them for the safer markets. But, this to him, and we can talk about if this is a positive or a negative at the end of the day, playing in your home country, you're going to have a lot of fan support. For a matchup bet, I feel like you're going to get the best out of him for 4 days, where he's going to try to put on whatever the best show that he can with it. Does that mean he's going to win at 110-1? That remains to be seen. But I ended up taking him early today in some matchup bets. And then the other name that I went to, and this is the bet that I talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago at Action, I took Shubankar Sharma at 400-1.
Yeah, I got 300, but he's on the card.
300-1 even still is a great price. I made the argument on that show that I did. This is a golfer that should have been 150-1. And you saw what he did at the Open Championship late there, where he worked himself up.
Right?
Yep, worked himself up the leaderboard. Very steady results. There are a lot of statistical data points within my model that would make me believe. You can look at the course history. He's played here. I think that's a positive. We're still lacking the high-end success, and we don't have that on the profile right now. But third in my model on similar fairways, when you compare his data to the field, he was 15th for weighted GIR percentage. That's the same sort of a profile that I talked about with Hovland, where one of the most significant weaknesses from within my math gets at least marginally concealed because errant shots end up being waterbound. There's a lot of other issues that come into play. And then there's, for me, 300, 400, whichever price you want to mention there, to me, this is 125-1 sort of golfer that you're getting at 2.5, 3, 4 times the price at a lot of these books. So that's probably the cutoff. And I know that's a wild answer to give when you say a 400-1 golfer is the cutoff that can win. But to me, this is like a legitimate top 20, 25 sort of player that if you would have put him and opened him at 200-1, my model still would have had intrigue at that price. So 300, 400, whatever you can find out there. I just think that's a really good value at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Pulled that trigger this morning. He's talked about really liking this golf course, performed well here in his 3 appearances throughout his career. Top 20 at Troon initially popped for me, and then it's the price. You can get 300-1 on Sharma right now. I think that you should all go out there and go take that. And it was kind of confirmed for me when I pulled up your model, and you've got him 8th overall in the entire field. I'm like, let's go, Sharma, $6,500. He'll probably be that very popular 6K range guy in DFS, but I think makes a ton of sense in an outright market. You mentioned Victor Perez. I thought that you brought up a fantastic point there. The matchup space, which you and I really like, going to, I think is a more sustainable method of betting than probably outrights. Less fun, but more sustainable long-term. Having those home course native ties could mean something, because we talked about what's there to play for if you can't get first, second, or third? And absolutely having a guy that is going to give you his best performance. If you can get him in a head-to-head matchup with someone like Eric Van Rooyen or Abraham Answer or Ryan Fox, and they're all the final day somewhere in the middle of the pack, I think that you can really trust Victor Perez to go out there and give it his absolute best effort, which is meaningful. And I'm sure all of these players will, but a little bit of focus, we know in the world of professional golf, that slips your mind for a minute can ultimately lead to disaster, particularly around a course like this. The other ones that I was sort of looking to, I thought a little bit about and haven't not pulled the trigger yet on Matthew Pavone. I just like him, and I love the fact that he checks a lot of boxes, and it's volatile with Pavone. But he won at Torrey Pines. He could have potentially won at Pebble Beach. He was, in the final groups in 2 of the 4 major championships this season. He's playing at home in France. He has course experience. He has knowledge around Le Golf National, and you're still getting 80-1 on a tour winner who, went off in the final group with Bryson DeChambeau a month and a half ago at Pinehurst, and outplayed Bryson that day, for a matter of fact. He actually shot a better score than him. So he's a name that I look to. I think a lot of people like Mito at 200-1. David Puig, Puig, I'm not sure how exactly you say it, but he's had a good run at this course before too, and been in pretty good form from what I've followed. I've bet him a couple of times on Live in the placement market, so he could be another option. But Sharma is definitely one that's on the card for me, and then I'm going to figure the rest out and put him up Wednesday. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and as far as like the matchups are concerned with Victor Perez goes, I ended up, you can get it over at Rotoballer. It's not going to be hard to find. I punched a bet on one of those. There is a specific matchup. I don't know if we're going to get it. I was hoping that we would get Victor Perez against Thorbjorn Olesen. That's the matchup that I specifically wanted.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we're going to, you never know with these spots. There are books out there that give you the ability to request a wager. I might go in there to see if I can request something on that. But yeah, I think if you have your bets in right now, that's great. Normally what ends up happening on a Monday is the numbers end up moving very quickly. And so if you don't get the best end of it, you're probably better off waiting here, figuring out all the pieces that come together. I don't think this has to be an answer we're filming this right now. It's 9:00 on the East Coast, essentially. Like, you can wait for the next 24 hours for a lot of these numbers to move. I think the movement has already occurred in a lot of these spots.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you there. The movement has already happened. There's a big move on Alex Noren this morning from 50 to 35. I'm not there. I can't bet him, dude. When he's there, like, okay, 50-1, you got an early, you got some CLV there, but you have Tom Kim there, you have Victor Hovland there. There's no way I'm going to go to Alex Noren in those situations. Some other notes that I have, just random stuff that I found from the Olympics. A couple of cool things. So the only player in the field that has had parents or a parent to compete in the Olympics before is Ben On. Both of his parents actually medaled in table tennis in the 1988 Olympics. 4 players in the field will be making their 3rd appearance, so have played in the Olympics in Rio, Tokyo, and now Paris. And it's not names that you would think. CT Pan, Ryan Fox, Gavin Green, Fabrizio Zanotti are the 4 players. So none of really the big names. I mentioned those guys. Kind of cool. Min Woo Lee and his sister, Min Ji Lee, will both be representing Team Australia, which was kind of cool. And if you want to watch the golf this week, you're going to want to download Peacock. Make sure you have that app. It's going to start at 3 a.m. Eastern time. So, early morning coffee golf once again ends around noon each day. Spencer, awesome. Thank you for joining me. I know that you've got the show with Byron here in a few minutes. Hopefully he is safe and sound after biking across the entire state of Iowa. What an absolute beast you are, Model Maniac. I wish you all the best. I'm sure you guys have a great show, but what other content? Tell everyone that's watching my show where they can find all the great stuff you put out each and every week.
Yeah, as an entire team, Joe, we just have so much information that goes up at Rotoballer. You can get my DraftKings article that's been written. That's my free article over at Rotoballer. That's already released right now. You can get any of my in-tournament stuff all the in-tournament bets over inside of Rotoballer, inside the Discord, and inside of an article. We've talked about a lot of math here. A lot of numbers have come up. You can get my model over at Rotoballer. That's my prize jewel that I have at the end of the day. And if you haven't done so already, I really hope you consider checking that out.
Thanks, dude. Good luck with Byron. I appreciate you hopping on the show at Tee Off Sports. It was a pleasure to have you on once again. If we hit both a combined winner this week, you will be on the intro video for 2025. Good to see you, brother. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thanks, bud. All right, gang. As always, you guys are awesome for checking out the show. Dave, I'm not sure what the comment means there, but I think this is my former high school quarterback, David Rogers, coming in on the chat. What's up, Dave? If that's you, thanks for checking out the show. Quick final thoughts here, and then we'll get out of here. Good luck at the Olympics. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this podcast whatsoever. Here's the thing, guys. I had a week, all right? I was going through some stuff mentally where I'm trying to get a little bit and become a little bit of a better person. Talked to a therapist. They have given me some advice to essentially stop seeking ulterior modes of self-appreciation, right? Kind of validate myself and stop looking for that. And they said that one of the issues I have with that is sort of looking through the lens of social media, and there can be so much negative on there. And there are plenty of people who do podcasts and live streams that'll tell you, don't read the comments, blah, blah, blah. I don't see it. It doesn't affect me. The reality of that is that's something that's very hard to do. But he mentioned turning off the ability for people to comment and chat on the show, and I would have never seen Dave here, but I don't want to do that because I draw so much from the positives that I get from it that it really outweighs the negatives. So if anyone, and there are a million of you guys that I owe a ton to, I've been doing this now for the last 3 or 4 years, and you guys are incredible and supportive, and it means the absolute world to me. But wanted to take a moment and mention two guys that check out the show every week. I didn't see him in here tonight, but I'm sure they'll be catching the recap, and just sent me a message and had no idea what I was going through at the time, but sent me a message. And I'm not going to say their name because I'm not sure if they want me to, but just kind of mentioned that I'm an inspiration and that it's something that him and his dad watch this show every single week and have really taken the time to bond over watching my show. And reading something like that literally wiped a smile across my face that I can't even describe. It made me feel very whole, made me feel very happy, made me feel very fulfilled. So as much negativity as there is out there, I want you to also put a spotlight on some of the positive things and be able to draw something from that. You guys are the absolute best for supporting me and watching this show each and every week. If this is your first time and you stumbled here upon this YouTube channel, give it a subscribe. We are going to have some contests running through the end of the PGA Tour FedEx Cup season. I try to give my heart and soul here every Monday night and give you the best possible golf content. A couple of winners in recent memory. I think the vibes are really turning around for this season, and happy to have you guys along board. My name is Joe Idoni. Once again, this has been the Preferred Lines Contest. Preferred Lines Contest. Preferred Lines Podcast. Tell a friend. Tell them you enjoy this show. Keep spreading the good word. I'll talk to you guys soon. I'm out of here. Good luck. Peace.